It is so good to be back worshiping with you again today. It has been a long time. I think the last time that I was here worshiping with you was when we celebrated the installation of Daniel as your pastor. And what a good day that was, indeed. Today I am moved by the hospitality that your staff and everyone I have met here this morning has extended to me. I am moved by your music, how good it is to feel that organ playing and those notes held. It is so good to feel that gathered together as the people of God worshiping this day. Thank you for allowing me to fill your pulpit as Daniel takes his sabbatical time of rest and renewal. Linguists in Glasgow found that more than 99% of the time, 2 words are enough for a person to distinguish the voice of someone they love. The study created this voice lineup, which operated similarly to when the police put together a lineup, a group of individuals that share similar physical characteristics or features in order to try to identify someone. But in the vocal lineup, several voices with similar acoustic properties were presented sequentially. The researchers found that the participants could identify the voices of their loved ones with 99.9% accuracy after 4 words. Thank you so much. In the hospital room, just moments after our son was born, a nurse took him across the room and began to weigh and measure and evaluate his tiny little body. All while our baby exercised his new lungs that had been filled with air for the first time, and he met the world with wailing. As my husband stood beside me, my mother wandered over across the room to say hello to her newest grandchild. We had shared a home with my parents, and they had awaited this birth with great enthusiasm, indulging my every ice cream craving and surrounding their baby girl with love as they awaited a new grandbaby to love as well. I could see her across the room looking down at him with eyes full of love and with all the emotion of the moment. And when she opened her mouth and started to speak to him, his crying immediately stopped. She shouted out, "He knows me!" Indeed, he did. He recognized her voice from the very first moment. A few months ago, my father experienced a traumatic brain event. Mercifully, he slipped into unconsciousness quickly, and then his body was kept alive long enough for my siblings and our spouses and my mother to encircle him with love and accompany him as he left this life into the next. In the role of pastor, I've been in many such rooms at this sacred threshold of a moment. And I have believed what science has proven, because I had experienced it myself to be true, that hearing is one of the last senses to go. But never had I been this intimately close and connected to the person who was dying. And nothing could have prepared me for the heartbreakingly beautiful moment of hearing my mother as she spoke words of love and gratitude, of reassurance and permission giving for him to go on ahead of her. As she spoke, his breathing and his heartbeat slowed into peace. Our circle of love surrounding him and the words of his beloved carrying him from this life into eternal. He knew her voice, even at the very last. So when I hear Jesus saying the sheep follow him because they know his voice, these are the moments I am thinking of. The sheep, the followers, the disciples, us. Knowing the voice of Jesus like my son and my father knew the voice of my mother. Not just knowing it with their ears, although certainly that, but knowing it with their hearts and with every fiber of their being, with the kind of recognition that loves deeply and trusts fully. The sheep hear his voice. He calls his sheep by name and leads them out. He brings them out, goes ahead of them, and they follow him because they know his voice. And the disciples, they still don't understand. So he explains a little more. He says, I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved and will come in and go out and find pastures. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. Now, that phrase, I am the gate, whoever enters by me will be saved, has gotten a lot of focus over the years. It's been lifted out of its context. It's been twisted a bit. It's been used to say something about salvation that may not entirely be supported by the text. But to begin to really understand, we have to back up a little and dig a little deeper and hear a little more of what Jesus is doing and saying. You see, the gospel reading for today from the Gospel of John, well, it's part of a larger unit of Scripture that holds action by Jesus, some dialogue and talking about that action, and then Jesus' own explanation of all of that. In order to really understand these 10 verses, we need to situate it within that larger unit of Scripture, which begins with the healing. The scene is set like this. There is a man who has been blind since birth, and he is sitting outside of the gate, and he is begging for a coin or for a piece of bread or something that might sustain him another day. Jesus and his disciples pass by this man, as they probably have many times, and they start debating amongst themselves what exactly caused his situation. And Jesus says to them, perhaps he is blind so that you may see. And then he spits on the ground. That's a hard picture to imagine, isn't it? But Jesus does it. He spits on the ground, and then he scoops it up in his hand, the dirt of the earth and the saliva of his mouth, and he pats it together, making a mud cake, which then he places on the man's eyes. Jesus tells him, now go, wash off this mud. And he does. And when he did, he could see. The people around were amazed by what they were seeing. And they didn't really compute, and so they started asking questions. How did this happen? What is going on here? and he recounts his story to them. He says, I was just sitting there, like I always do, when someone put this stuff on my eyes, told me to go wash it off, and I did. And then I could see. Well, the people didn't know what to do with that story. So they take him into the church, into the temple, to the religious leaders, who then ask their similar questions. How can this be? What has happened? And he recounts the story again, very plainly. He put mud on my eyes. I washed it off, and now I see. Plain and simple. But the religious folk weren't satisfied with that. And they turned their focus and their questions from what had happened to who is this that would do such a thing. After all, it was the Sabbath. And on the Sabbath, only God could heal, making whoever healed this man a sinner. The ends did not justify the means, in their opinion, and they start debating among themselves about exactly what this means, and they end up a little bit divided about it. So they turn to the formerly blind man once again and ask him who he thinks Jesus is. Is he some sort of sinning heretic, or is he the fulfillment of prophecy and all their hopes? And the man answers saying, he is a prophet. Now, at this point, there is no evidence that the formerly blind man has actually seen Jesus. He has only known him by the sound of his voice. But the formerly blind man is beginning to see the light. He is beginning to recognize Jesus. His belief in who Jesus is, saying that he is a prophet, is developing as he is retelling his own encounter with them. And he begins making meaning of what it is that he has experienced firsthand. The actual act of his testimony has everything to do with his capacity to believe. He is witnessing his way into belief. Well, the religious folk weren't satisfied with the formerly blind man's report, so they bring him to his parents. They ask questions of mom and dad, and mom and dad confirm that indeed their son was born blind. And then the religious folk ask of them, so how is it that he now sees? And this is where I imagine the parents doing a double take and saying, wait, what? He can see? This is the first they're hearing about it. They have no idea. They can't answer these questions, so they tell the religious folk to go and ask their son. He's an adult after all. He can speak for himself, and they want to know the story too. So they all go back and they talk to the formerly blind man once again, and he repeats his story again. I was blind, now I see. This is what I know. How many times are you going to ask me this question? How many times do I have to tell you my story? Do you want to become his disciple too? And the religious folks say, aha, you are one of his disciples. Now, the man doesn't know it yet, but this is exactly what Jesus will call him. And I'm not sure the man knows it yet that this is true of himself, but he's talking his way into it. There's a lot of talking in this healing story. And after some more talking between the religious folk and the man who was formerly blind, they meet the limit of their tolerance, and they throw him out. His testimony, his questions, his answers, his belief, none of it is welcome within their walls. he is not welcome. Once again, he finds himself sitting outside the gate, a familiar place that he's been day after day after day of his life, and yet everything is different. Jesus has gone about his business during all of this back and forth, but now word reaches him that the religious folk have thrown the man out of the temple, and Jesus goes and finds him and asks him, "Do you believe in me?" And he responds, "I believe." And Jesus says a most curious thing. "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind." And the disciples respond, "Wait, what? He's not saying we're blind, right?" That's the thing about Jesus. People always think they know what he's about. But people don't know. Disciples don't know. We don't know. Misunderstanding is the most common response to Jesus throughout scriptures. He speaks with such truth and depth that it can take us a lifetime to really wrap our hearts and minds around it. It turns out that to know Jesus requires a deeper level of engagement. And we can start that deeper level of engagement by not taking single sentences or sections of the story for the whole story, but by encountering and exploring and excavating the broader, deeper, fuller story. Our scripture passage for today we can understand better if we delve into what Jesus is explaining. When we delve into this healing and understand that he is talking about what we have just heard. It is written, "The sheep hear his voice. He calls his sheep by name and leads them out. He brings them out, going ahead of them, and they follow him because they know his voice." And the disciples still don't understand. So he explains a little more. "I am the gate, or the door. Whoever enters by me will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." In this story, Jesus the gate, Jesus the door, is about abundant life. Belonging, inclusion, protection, care, provision, and an intimate relationship with Jesus. Jesus is the door by which the man who is blind is brought into abundant life, never again to be relegated to sit outside the community. Never again will he wonder where his next meal will be, or who will answer his plea as he sits begging. He will know the safety and sanctuary of community. He has been saved from isolation, from living on the margins, and from everlasting darkness. Jesus will not tolerate any of us having to settle for anything less than abundant life. He will find us. He will call our names and lead us into this abundance. And we will come in and we will go out and find pasture. You know, this is Good Shepherd Sunday, hence the reading of the 23rd Psalm and hearing all of those allusions to this great metaphor. The fourth Sunday of Easter is always Good Shepherd Sunday, but in 3 of the 4 years of lectionary cycle, we hear Jesus say, "I am the Good Shepherd." Good Shepherd. And that image is the stuff of so many songs, so much liturgy, so much church art. It's an image that has some marketing chops. Gate Sunday, or Door Sunday, just doesn't have that same razzle-dazzle, does it? Sounds like a day we might lift those bumper sticker claims high and bar the doors of our church and shut the world out. But that's not quite right, is it? And it certainly doesn't lead to abundant life. So we may never hear a song or speak liturgy or see church art depicting Jesus, the door. But that doesn't mean the image of Jesus, the door, doesn't deserve being lifted up and examined too, for it is good news. It is good news for any of us who have had doors slammed in our faces. It's good news for any of us that have had church doors closed behind us as we've been chased out and away. It is good news for any of us who have been settling for anything less than abundant life. For God is calling us and leading us into something more, to enter into a space of belonging and care, to go deeper into our knowing and our believing and following until we find ourselves carried from this life into abundant life. To be a follower of Jesus is to know his voice. Do you hear him calling your name? This I know for sure. He will seek you and find you and comfort and carry you from the very first moment and even to the very last. Thanks be to God.